Two landmark landings today. Space Shuttle Atlantis coming in for a landing over the California desert, just minutes away from touchdown at Edwards Air Force Base. And Mikhail Gorbachev lands in New York for tomorrow's Moscow on the Hudson summit. This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting. Good evening. We'll be covering the shuttle landing live in just a few moments. First, about the arrival of the Gorbachevs here in New York. The Soviet mill is continuing to churn out more talk of possible December surprises. Dutch radio quoting Moscow sources today as saying Gorbachev may propose a 30% cut in Soviet ground forces. And so this story goes, unconfirmed, Soviet Defense Minister Yazov may be threatening to quit if Gorbachev puts that kind of deal on the table. CBS News was told this evening by three separate sources that Gorbachev also may have something up his sleeve on Cuba. Now, true or not, all of this Soviet pumping up of expectations comes in the hours before tomorrow's Reagan-Bush-Gorbachev three-way summit. CBS News correspondent Bob Schieffer begins our Eve of the Summit coverage.
He was actually a few minutes early, arriving on a crisp, cold day at a heavily guarded remote corner of the airport. The question as the big Soviet airliner came to a stop, what does Gorbachev have in mind? Is this just a casual visit, a public relations exercise, or is he here to talk business? For sure, he looked all business as he made his way through the greeting party of Soviet and American UN officials and ambassadors. Even the smile was crisp and businesslike, and so too were his comments as he left open the possibility that serious topics will be broached.
Который проходит в своем развитии очень важный этап.
We have not arranged any formal agenda, so either side will be free, openly and frankly, to raise any questions that it wishes to.
He did not mention news reports out of Moscow that he may announce a big reduction in the size of the Soviet army, and a spokesman would say only, stay tuned.
Just wait till tomorrow, it's just one day.
1, 2, 3, 4, open up the iron door.
A small group protesting Soviet Jewish immigration policy demonstrated, but they were kept well back, and there were no incidents as Gorbachev's long motorcade snaked its way out of the airport and on into Manhattan, where for the next 3 days, his people say, he wants to take as big a bite as possible from the Big Apple. Bob Schieffer, CBS News at Kennedy Airport.
This is Barry Peterson at the Soviet mission. It was a glistening first-ever view of the Big Apple for the General Secretary. The mid-afternoon Manhattan crowds were sparse but friendly, and the Gorbachevs waved back. At the Soviet mission, where the Gorbachevs will stay during their New York visit, nervous police were double-checking security until the last minute. Not even the manholes were left uncovered. A few residents in nearby posh apartment buildings were annoyed at all this extra hubbub, but most seemed tolerant of New York's premier tourist. The crowds at the mission were just the curious. The 45-car motorcade arrived from the airport without a hitch, the kind of commute any New Yorker would envy. When President Reagan visited Moscow last May, he took an unannounced walk on his first day in town. The Gorbachevs have so far seemed satisfied to just stay indoors and rest up for a busy day tomorrow. And that tomorrow is going to be a big day in the Big Apple. The General Secretary will speak at the United Nations and then have lunch with Mr. Reagan and Mr. Bush. Dan?
Barry, let's talk about the substance that Russians have been hitting. First, real possibility of some deal on reducing Soviet troop strength in Europe?
Just before we left Moscow, Dan, there were rumors that such an announcement might be made, reducing troops by perhaps as many as 1 million. The Soviets have about 5 million troops. So it's entirely possible that that might happen, and it would be consistent with Mr. Gorbachev trying to woo our allies in Western Europe. It would be a sign to them that he would like to pull back and scale down his military, and it means we'd have to come up with some response. Dan?
And how about on Cuba?
I think there may be some effort to do something about Cuba, because Cuba is kind of a stick in the side of America, and Mr. Gorbachev might like to pull that out. But I don't think he's going to do it unless he gets something back in return.
And there's been some talk of trade, but the Soviets realistically don't have much that we want to trade for. What could that be about?
Well, I think the Soviets may not have a lot to sell us, Dan, but they have a lot they would like to buy from us, and that's a big part of what's going on. I think they would like to open the trade doors so that American businessmen will get into the Soviet Union and help Mikhail Gorbachev rebuild his economy.
And quickly, Barry, how about on human rights?
Let's see what happens, but I think Gorbachev has indicated he may make some move on that as well.
Any doubt in your mind that he is coming with some kind of December surprise?
Dan, I can't imagine he would come this far and make this much noise and not have something up that sleeve.
Very sorry, we're going to have to break away from you now, thanks, to begin our live coverage of the shuttle landing at Edwards Air Force Base. After dropping out of space and out of the clouds, homecoming time now for the all-military five-man crew of the space shuttle. This is live. Picture now of Atlantis approaching final descent for touchdown on the California desert runway at Edwards Air Force Base after deploying a $500 million Soviet-watching spy satellite on this not-so-secret mission for the U.S. Defense Department. As the shuttle comes in on a graceful glide, let's watch and listen.
Gear is down and locked. Velocity 400 feet per second. Main gear touchdown. Nose gear touchdown.
And so, for the second time since the tragedy of Space Shuttle Challenger, an American space shuttle
Good braking.
has gone up and come down. Another shuttle mission accomplished. Wheels down, safe home. Now, more of the Bush team taking shape today. President-elect George Bush today named Stanford University professor Michael Boskin to be his chief economic advisor. No surprise, because Boskin is architect of what Mr. Bush calls the flexible freeze budget plan. Some Democrats call it a fraud, and some other independent economists consider it questionable at best. But also named today, longtime friend and Bush campaign finance chairman Robert Mosbacher, Bob Mosbacher, to be Commerce Secretary. And Carla Hills, who was Housing Secretary under Gerald Ford, to be Special Trade Representative. Two foreign policy appointments, too, both to posts George Bush himself once held. William Webster has been asked to stay on as Director of the Central Intelligence Agency. And veteran U.S. diplomat Thomas Pickering picked for United Nations Ambassador. Now, still to come on tonight's CBS Evening News, correspondent Anthony Mason on Gorbachev's winter of discontent inside Russia. And an exclusive look inside Kabul, the capital city of the Soviet failure in Afghanistan. White House Christmas tree. The tree is an 18-foot balsam fir, and it was presented by the Irv Daggett family of Montello, Wisconsin. Mrs. Reagan was asked about her often reported difficulties with Raisa Gorbachev, with whom she'll be dining tomorrow here in New York.
You all keep saying that there's a feud and a fuss and feud. And there really isn't. I think there's been too much attention paid to it. I do. I really do.
All over Midtown New York, it's beginning to look a lot like Gorbachev. Some New Yorkers already in the thick of the holiday shopping and gridlock season are seeing red. Correspondent Richard Roth reports, you can't get there from here.
Even before the traffic got this way, New Yorkers had given it a name, Gorbachev Gridlock, and a nickname.
Gorby Lock, that's a new one. It's nice.
The only important rule of the road for the next few days is that the Russian entourage has the right of way. Gridlock for the cause of world peace, says a traffic official, and New Yorkers are nothing if not accommodating.
What's going to mean? Gridlock up the wazoo. It's going to be something else, man. I'm really looking forward to it.
It's exactly what you expect when you come to New York.
It's clear Gorbachev couldn't have picked a better time to visit. The city's dressed up in holiday finery, and though the season's just gotten underway, the holiday spirit is already infectious.
I've been out here all day like this, you know what I mean?
In December, it's said, this city is made for extravagance. And while the Gorbachevs may have tasted the forbidden fruit of capitalism before, other places, other times are only practice for a retail encounter in the Big Apple.
If you have any problems, you call me on the 800 number? Okay.
Well, it's probably a lot different than it is in Moscow. And, you know, with the lights and the activities and the shopping.
Sure, we know here at the end of the lines there's actually something to buy. Moscow may be the workers' paradise. Manhattan they call the shopper's paradise.
1850.
And the mayor is convinced Gorbachev will be charmed.
Well, he may think he doesn't want to go home. How are you going to keep him down on the farm once they've seen New York?
Santa Claus is coming to town.
Life in New York is an art form all its own. It's called the art of survival, and New Yorkers practice it every day cheerfully, even when anticipating the adversity of a visit that threatens to slow the city's bustle.
And the sooner he gets out of town, the happier I'm going to be.
Here he comes!
Richard Roth, CBS News, New York.
U.S. federal officials today talked up the latest round of high-publicity drug busts. This time, it's the sting that beeped. Undercover drug agents provided unsuspecting Colombian cocaine traffickers with beepers and other gear, supposedly to make smuggling operations easier. They were actually homing devices, so federal agents could keep tabs on them. More than 90 people have been charged in the U.S. and abroad.
Are you okay, Dad?
Sure, doctor said it's heartburn.
Heartburn and high blood pressure. He wants him to cut out salt. Well, you better do it. He will. Don't worry.
If you're one of millions of heartburn sufferers and also have to cut out salt, cut it out of your antacid, too. Riopan Plus 2 is sodium-free, and it starts neutralizing stomach acid in 10 seconds.
Dessert?
Well, you're sure feeling better, Dad.
For heartburn and indigestion, Riopan Plus 2, sodium-free, and it works fast.
That'll be a charge.
We interrupt this purchase for a reminder.
Don't forget, Santa.
'Tis the season to be choosy.
La 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 la.
That's it.
So choose the card that actually pays you cash back for every charge. The Discover card.
That's a great idea.
You sure know how to pick them.
It pays to Discover, the card that pays you back.
Great. What is it?
Hot grape nuts. The recipe's easy. The result, a savory blend of wholesome wheat and barley, deliciously hearty, uniquely grape nuts. For a great hot taste from an unexpected place, hot grape nuts cereal.
Shoot some slices, shoot some shreds, shoot some salad. Salad, salad, salad shooter.
Presto Salad Shooter, slicer, shredder. Point and shoot right where you want it. To clean, just rinse and wipe. Store anywhere.
Shoot some salad, 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 salad shooter.
From Presto.
PLO leader Yasser Arafat held a controversial meeting today in Stockholm with 5 American Jewish leaders. A government spokesman said it was possibly the beginning of a new Jewish-Palestinian peace dialogue. But an Israeli diplomat described the Jewish leaders as, quote, unimportant. During the New York stay of the Kremlin first couple, Raisa Gorbachev plans to drop in at one of the world's most luxurious department stores. At home, shopping for the average Russian isn't such a treat. Many agree that Mikhail Gorbachev has changed the style of Soviet life, but increasingly there are doubts about his ability to deliver for Soviet consumers and doubts that the substance of Soviet life will change anytime soon. As we hear from Anthony Mason tonight in our continuing series, The Winter of Discontent.
In early December, Muscovites put their heads into the icy wind and think about the new year. In a country where there's no official Christmas, New Year's is the time to buy presents for the family and think about the future. This year, they're wondering whether Perestroika will bring better times. Irina Vakulina says you can already see Perestroika at work in her store, the House of Toys. Russian factories are making more toys now, and better ones. Look at the Malvina doll, she says. She might have come out cross-eyed a few years ago. And the bears. We used to have only brown, but now we have blue ones and pink ones. See, they're lighter, too. The blue bears of Perestroika have their buyers, but Alexander, shopping with his son Dima, isn't sold. Perestroika hasn't changed things, he says. People are talking more, but I think it's better to do than to talk. History has taught Muscovites that nothing changes quickly in their country. This winter, whatever hopes they may have about the promise of Perestroika are clouded by apprehensions about their future. What happens to them if Gorbachev fails?
Sit down, please, Matthew.
Each night, Ludmila Chebrova sits down to dinner with 4 generations of her family, all living together in a small 3-room apartment. But because of Perestroika, she's been given more freedom to experiment in her job as a scientist at the Fyodorov Eye Institute. Our family is on the cutting edge of Perestroika, she says. Gorbachev must succeed. It's what we're living for. But for most Muscovites, there still isn't much to fill a squeaky shopping cart. While the birds peck over the butter, housewives peck over the meat. They turn it over and over again, perhaps hoping to see something they know isn't there. When Antonina Petrovna looked in her shopping cart, she suddenly got angry. There's nothing here, she says. It's worse under Perestroika. This store's as empty as a ghost town. You buy your bread and milk and say "Do svidanya." Antonina headed to the checkout counter, brushing off store clerks. If you think the food's so good, she told them, you eat it. Each winter's day, not far from the Kremlin, a huge steam cloud hovers. When it parts briefly, you'll find the Esther Williamses of winter bobbing in the outdoor pool. It's 10 below zero today, but you should come when it's 30 below, they say. We're here. Indeed, these ladies, many in their 60s and 70s, have seen life much worse. We support what Gorbachev is doing, Alexandra Petrovna insists, in between body twists. Ira isn't so sure. Nothing is going to change. But she thinks for a moment. Well, at least it's better than before. We feel freer. Anya's young family feels it too. Spiritually and intellectually, we're better off, say Anya and her husband Yuri. We can live without meat, but let there be openness. At nightfall, excited newlyweds lay flowers at a monument to the poet Pushkin. It's a traditional gesture of thanks and hope. Soviets know this is a delicate moment in their history, and this winter, many quietly wonder whether hopeful gestures will be enough to sustain them in these uncertain times. Anthony Mason, CBS News, Moscow.
I can't get out of bed.
Ever notice how even the smallest cold turns everything into a big effort?
What a drag!
It's time to get the big relief of Dimetap. In 12-hour extend tabs, Dimetap is recommended millions of times by doctors and pharmacists.
So you have a cold? I've got just the thing.
Dimetap. It gets things back to normal.
Around here, breakfast time is like the playoffs. My goal is getting him to eat right. His game plan's a little different. So I give him Wheaties. It's full of good nutrition, not sugar. He's sweet enough.
Wheaties, 100% whole wheat, naturally low in sugar. That's champion nutrition for the whole family.
Victory.
That'll be a charge.
We interrupt this purchase for a reminder. The Discover card actually pays you cash back for every charge.
That's a great idea.
Don't forget, Santa.
It pays to Discover.
There are headaches.
And the car payment is overdue.
And headaches. There's aspirin. And Anacin. The Anacin aspirin formula relieves headaches better than regular aspirin.
Feeling better, hun?
Not just better, better.
Anacin. Better relief.
As Mikhail Gorbachev arrived in New York, there were reports of a growing food shortage, forcing officials of the Afghan government he props up in Kabul to evacuate their families. With resistance fighters tightening the noose, the Afghan capital is no longer the safe Soviet bastion it was. CBS News sent several camera crews inside Afghanistan, and tonight, the second report in our exclusive series, Afghanistan, the Soviet Failure. Morning in Kabul, where the Soviets' failed military adventure, hopefully, is drawing to an end.
4, 5, 4.
The rebels are now bringing the 9-year-old war to the heart of the capital. Over the last 4 months, Kabul has been rocketed virtually every day. Soviet forces struggle to protect a perimeter that is getting ragged at the edges. This is the face of Soviet defeat. Almost 1 million Soviets fought here to support a communist revolution that failed.
Кому это надо, никому не надо, кому это нужно, никому не нужно.
The pilots in this helicopter wing are counting the days until the scheduled February 15th pullout. While this birthday party was going on, rockets tore into a military transport plane just outside the barracks. 11 Soviets were killed. An estimated 13,000 Soviet soldiers have died in this war. The song is a traditional Russian soldier's song called Who Needs This? Today, the men are off duty, but tomorrow, they'll be back. The choppers escort every plane using Kabul Airport. A blanket of hot flares is spewed across the sky to confuse the heat-seeking Stinger missiles used by the rebels. This giant freighter made it in safely from the Soviet Union. Its valuable cargo, 22 tons of potatoes. This besieged city has to get food in any way it can. The other lifeline is the Solong Highway, a 270-mile road running north to the Soviet border. Fuel and firewood, medicines, food, building materials, and war material. Whatever cannot come in by plane must come down this road. The highway has been a major battle zone over the years. Now, an undeclared truce is in effect. The rebels tell their enemy, as long as you Russians keep leaving, you won't be shot. The food shortages and the rocket attacks have taken their toll on Kabul. Afghans who once saw the capital as a refuge from the war are now trying to get out. Afghans know the Indian embassy is the only place to get a visa out of the country. Scenes like this are becoming more commonplace. The U.S. Embassy is fortifying its own defenses. These Soviet soldiers, trying to keep the airport open, are pounding positions used by the rebels. Their bunker overlooks the diplomats' golf course. American diplomats have plenty of time for golf. All embassy wives and children have been evacuated. Kabul is being squeezed. Afghan and Soviet military vehicles mix with private cars to create monumental traffic jams. Residents' nerves are frayed. The end game is wearing. People are tired. For some farmers, the safest place to plant their crops is alongside the fortified airport runways. Rebel attacks on supply lines have led to shortages in the marketplace. Prices are creeping up. There are shortages of able-bodied men. But Kabul seems remarkably resilient. No one can say what will happen after the Soviets pull out, but Afghans say if they can survive 9 years of war, they can survive the peace ahead.
What we can do now? If I leave the country, again you can tell me to where should I live now? How I can leave the country with so many, let's say, problems we are faced with.
But the Soviets know they are leaving. Major Vitaly Budikov is telling his pilots he's been given their unit's withdrawal plan. They will leave in January. They will fly their choppers back home. The war has been a bloody defeat for the Soviets. The war has been a tragedy for Afghanistan. God willing, say the people here, it's almost over. And that's tonight's CBS Evening News. Dan Rather. Tomorrow we'll be on the air live and often with today's events of Assignment Gorbachev. So, see you tomorrow. Good night.
Wow.
What you eating, babe?
Nothing, honey.
Oh, you can tell me.
Kellogg's Nut and Honey Crunch.
Looks good, Private. What is it?
Nothing, honey.
Kellogg's Nut and Honey Crunch.
When you've got the special taste of nuts and honey all wrapped up in a hearty crunch, what more can you say? Here's what. New Nut and Honey Crunch Biscuits. Crunchy biscuits of wholesome shredded wheat with that special nut and honey taste inside.
Wow.
Kellogg's Nut and Honey.
Now in biscuits, too.
Crunch.
How bad is your sinus headache? Does it hurt here and here? Can you feel the pressure here and here? Now there's maximum strength Cyanate. No matter how bad it is, Cyanate gives you maximum strength relief without drowsiness. Cyanate handles both the terrible pain and the pressure. Not even extra strength headache medicines can do that. Maximum strength Cyanate. No pain, no pressure, no sinus headache.
Phone calls, deadlines, stomach complaints, my job, and my Lanta 2.
Double strength, my Lanta 2. Nearly double the acid neutralizing power of any leading brand.
Because my life takes my Lanta 2.
Time for a quick break and one of my favorite quick snacks, Sunsweet pitted prunes. Surprised? I don't know why. They're good for you and they're delicious. Rounder, plumper, Sunsweet.
I'm Kathleen Sullivan.
And I'm Harry Smith. Assignment Gorbachev. Tomorrow, Soviets in the stock market.
And Soviet talk show hosts talk with us tomorrow on CBS This Morning.
This is CBS.
Looking